A tampered shipment, a forged name, a detective who never leaves. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Samuel Drake. Drop a comment with your city. I want to know where the mystery is reaching. You make this storytelling worth every word. Thanks for tuning in. Now, the case begins. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that makes you suspect nature's trying to bore you into joining a cult or taking up gardening. The sky was the color of a tepid ashtray, and I'd already rearranged the files in Wolfe's cabinet twice. Neither time because I needed to. So when the doorbell rang at 2:44 p.m., I practically leapt for it like it owed me money. The man who stood outside was somewhere north of Dapper and south of Smug. He was dressed in a cocoa-brown suit so tailored it could have passed for architectural design, with a silk tie patterned like an espresso swirl and eyes that told you he'd negotiated with both pirates and paralegals. "I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice clipped like a premium cigar. "Join the club," I said. "But you get a badge if he actually agrees." "Name?" "DeCarlo. Anton DeCarlo. I represent the Eastern Seaboard Coffee Importers Cooperative." Now, I don't flinch at long titles, but this one had the sound of trouble vacuum-packed and shelf-stable. I gave him a look that said he'd better be serious, then buzzed Fritz to alert the royal chambers. Wolfe's voice came back over the intercom, reluctant and resonant as ever. "Bring him in, Archie." I led DeCarlo through the front room, past the globe, the rare books, and the aura of a man who believes comfort is the 8th deadly sin if you don't achieve it through inertia. Wolfe was in his chair, surrounded by the subtle perfume of hyacinth from the conservatory and the unsubtle glower of a man interrupted during digestion. DeCarlo didn't wait for permission. He strode in and took the red chair on the left like he'd paid property taxes on it. "My apologies for the intrusion, Mr. Wolfe, but this is both delicate and urgent." Wolfe gave him one long look, the kind of look that has subtext, footnotes, and an appendix, and then muttered, "Phooey, explain." DeCarlo leaned forward. "Our cooperative imports over 60% of the high-grade specialty beans that enter New York through legitimate channels. For the past 3 months, several shipments have arrived tampered with the wrong beans, mislabeled crates, and falsified customs seals. The pattern is precise, intentional. Someone is compromising our trade routes. That," Wolfe said, "is a problem for the Department of Agriculture. Or the Mafia. I do not engage in agricultural diagnostics." DeCarlo smiled faintly, the way a cobra might if it practiced. "It gets better. Last week, our lead shipping coordinator, Thomas Negrelli, was found unconscious in his apartment. Empty bottle beside him. Police called it a suicide attempt. I don't buy it. Neither does his sister." Wolfe closed his eyes. "A suicide attempt? By coffee?" "Bah, there was a note," DeCarlo said. "Typed, unsigned, but it mentioned Wolfe. It said, 'Ask the man who refuses instant answers.'" I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at the air. A silence settled between us like it had moved in for a season. "Let me be plain," DeCarlo continued. "Someone is sabotaging our operation, and they're smart enough to know you won't touch it unless you're personally nettled. That note was bait. Whether it came from Negrelli or his saboteur, it worked. You're nettled." Wolfe opened his eyes but didn't lift his head. "I despise subterfuge." "And someone's using it in your name," DeCarlo said. "If your reputation is being manipulated, that's not subterfuge. It's sacrilege." That did it. Not the coffee. Not sabotage. The idea that someone was tossing his name around like a coupon at a clearance sale. He grunted. "I accept it conditionally." DeCarlo blinked. "Conditionally? You will bring me the files on all recent shipments, names of all logistic handlers, and contact information for Mr. Negrelli's known associates. Also, samples. And you will not set foot in my house again without permission." DiCarlo rose, the snake charmer's grin returning. Understood. I walked him to the door. As I opened it, he turned and said quietly, "You'll find this more than a matter of beans, Mr. Goodwin. What's brewing is bigger than commerce." And with that subtle pun, he vanished into the ashtray sky. Back in the office, Wolfe was already scribbling a grocery list of demands in that blocky handwriting of his. "Archie," he said without looking up, "contact Saul Panzer. Tell him I need a discreet check on a man named Anton DiCarlo, and clear my afternoon. I will be thinking." That wasn't exactly a ticker tape parade, but for Wolfe, it was practically a cannon blast. The coffee game had sent its first ripple across the brownstone, and I had a hunch this wouldn't be the last time someone tried to stir his pot. By Wednesday morning, the brownstone had developed that faint electric charge it gets when a new case is being digested mentally, not gastronomically. Fritz was still serving up his usual miracles in the kitchen, and Wolfe still insisted on silence between bites, but the air held a new density, like the space between lightning and thunder. Wolfe didn't speak much at breakfast. Nothing new there, but his eyes were slower than usual, locked somewhere on the far wall, which for him meant the gears were grinding. When a man like Wolfe thinks, it's not with the twitch of a brow or the furrow of a forehead. It's with stillness so complete it makes you want to check his pulse. At 10:15 sharp, Saul Panzer called back. I was in the front room rereading a report from our last run-in with a blackmail ring that had overestimated their intelligence and underestimated Wolfe's. I took the call at my desk, made sure my notes stayed neat, and walked it into the office. Wolfe accepted the slip of paper like it might, bruise if handled too briskly. After reading, he nodded once, which in Wolfie's translated to interesting, possibly useful. "You may live another day." "DiCarlo checks out," I said. "At least as far as Saul can dig on short notice. Private school upbringing, Ivy League Polish, and a resume that includes 3 trade negotiations, 2 coffee expos, and 1 short marriage to the daughter of a Jamaican importer. A man who likes his beans single origin and his business fully controlled." "He's ambitious," Wolfe murmured. "Too ambitious to play courier unless he's more entangled than he lets on." "And too smooth to let it show," I added. "That smile yesterday. I've seen fencers with less finesse." Wolfe didn't answer. His hand drifted toward a small notebook on his desk, the one he uses when a case has passed from mildly irritating to worthy of deduction. I opened it. Another milestone. At noon, the doorbell rang again. This time, Fritz didn't buzz Wolfe. He just looked at me over the railing from the upstairs landing, nodded once, and retreated back into the kitchen. I took the cue and answered. The woman standing there didn't wait for pleasantries. "I'm Lenora Negrelli. I called yesterday. You never returned my message." I let the word message hang in the air like a slap. Her voice was crisp but not shrill. Her suit was dark green, tailored but not loud. Everything about her looked just barely held together, like porcelain under tension. She wasn't dressed for grief, but for business, which, depending on the company, often involves about the same level of betrayal. I opened the door wider. "Come in, Miss Negrelli." "Or is it Mrs.?" "Miss," she said. "Tommy's my brother." "Right this way." When I showed her into the office, Wolfe looked up and gave her his version of a courteous nod, a chin dip and the faintest movement of one eyebrow. You'd think it was a royal audience. "Sit, please," he said. She did, perching on the edge of the same red chair DiCarlo had occupied, like it might start spinning if she relaxed. She glanced around the room. Books, orchids, and Wolfe. Then back to Wolfe, as if deciding which was the more intimidating. "I understand you've agreed to look into the matter," she said. Wolfe clasped his hands. Tentatively. "You were the one who found your brother." "Yes. I hadn't heard from him in 2 days. When I let myself into his apartment, he was on the couch, barely conscious. There was a bottle of bourbon next to him, half gone. And a note. Typed, Wolfe said. Mentioning me. Yes, she hesitated. Which is why I'm here. Wolfe gestured. Please elaborate. Lenora took a breath, and her voice tightened just slightly. My brother worked logistics for the cooperative. He loved it. The work, the travel, the sense of trust. But a few months ago, he changed. He started complaining about paperwork not matching shipments, about sudden reroutes that didn't make sense. He was worried. Worried enough to act? I asked. She nodded. He said he'd started keeping a journal. At first, just to track inconsistencies, then names. That perked Wolfe up slightly. This journal. Do you have it? No, she said. I searched his apartment after the hospital admitted him. I found nothing. Wolfe frowned. Yet someone typed a note and left it beside him. That's what bothers me. Tommy never typed anything. He wrote everything by hand, even his grocery lists. Perhaps someone wanted the note to be anonymous, Wolfe said. Lenora looked at him steadily. Or someone didn't want the handwriting recognized. That hung in the air for a moment. Do you believe he tried to kill himself? I asked. No, she said firmly. He was many things, but not hopeless. He was scared, I could tell, but not hopeless. In the cooperative? Wolfe asked. Are you a member? I'm an auditor, she said. I used to be a freelancer, then they offered me a permanent position last year. I report directly to their finance director. Name? Brenda Valois. Wolfe blinked. Just once. I caught it. He turned to me. Archie. Make an appointment with Miss Valois. Tomorrow, no later than 11, and arrange a visit to Mr. Negrelli's apartment this afternoon. You got it. Lenora stood. I want to know who did this to him. Wolfe inclined his head again, as do I. After she left, Wolfe sat quietly. I waited. When he spoke, it wasn't to me. Someone is trying to create chaos in a business built on supply chains and precision. That requires knowledge and malice, and a steady hand with a typewriter, I added. Wolfe grunted. Phooey, an amateur touch. Anonymity is for cowards and bureaucrats. I headed for the door, notebook in hand. I'll start at the apartment. Want me to take Saul? Not yet, Wolfe said. Observe. Catalogue. Do not interfere. Which, as you might guess, is like asking a dog not to sniff at a steak. But I nodded and grabbed my coat. If someone was playing games with Wolfe's name and a coffee importer's trust, it was my job to sniff out the trail, steak or no steak. And if the next person I met had a better poker face than DeCarlo, well, they'd still have to play their hand eventually. Wolfe would see to that. Thomas Negrelli's apartment was 2 blocks off Riverside, sandwiched between a corner market and a yoga studio that smelled like eucalyptus and underemployment. The building was older, brick-faced, the kind of place where the doormen remember birthdays and the elevators creak out their protests. I rang the manager and showed him my license. He didn't ask many questions after that. He just pointed me to 5C and went back to arguing with the delivery guy about who was supposed to sign for a pallet of seltzer. Inside, the place had the air of a life paused. The lights were off. A faint aftertaste of bourbon still lingered in the air, but that could have been the couch fabric. It was clean. Too clean. Like someone had tried to tidy up guilt with Lysol. But you can't wipe down suspicion. It just settles in the corners. I took my time. Nothing fancy. Just walked through, slow and methodical. Wolfe might never leave the house, but he trained me to look like I do. A missing journal would leave more than an absence. It would leave intent. That's what I was hunting. The desk drawers were organized with bills, tax receipts, and a few stamped envelopes that smelled like stale ink and anxiety. Nothing personal. No scribbled notes, no postcards, no pages of doodled frustration. People who live alone usually leave traces. Negrelli had erased his, or someone had done it for him. In the bedroom, the sheets were rumpled, but not slept in. Clothes in the hamper, sure, but they looked like they'd been placed there rather than tossed. The closet was neat, shoes lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. A box of receipts on the shelf caught my eye, mostly shipping tags and warehouse orders from the last few months. I snapped a few photos. Wolfe likes his data grilled and sliced, not sautéed in interpretation. On the way out, I stopped at the bookshelf. Mostly business texts, some trade magazines. But in the middle, tucked between global commodity structures and a coffee table book on Caribbean trade, was a slim leather volume, barely noticeable. Not locked, not labeled. Inside were pages, handwritten. I haven't touched it yet. I first scanned the names B. Valois, G. Datcher, A. DiCarlo, M. Coyne. Then, beneath one name, Pressure Building. Brenda knows. DiCarlo, nervous. Spoke to Coyne late. I took out my gloves, lifted the book into an envelope, and sealed it. Wolfe would want untouched fingerprints, not my smudges. That's the difference between a detective and a nosy neighbor. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms. I waited in the office until he finished his 400 ritual. Fritz brought me a sandwich with watercress and something that tasted like ambition. At 4:31, Wolfe entered, took his chair, and motioned without a word. I placed the envelope on his desk, from Negrelli's apartment, hidden but not lost. Names, notes, suspicion. Wolfe opened it, leafing through with the caution of a man handling another man's brain. After a few minutes, he closed it. "Now," he said, "the circle forms." That circle started shaping itself the next morning. I met Brenda Valois at the Cooperative's Midtown office, 10th floor. Glass walls, polite furniture. She was 45, trim and professional, with hair the color of wet slate and an expression that said she hadn't had a decent night's sleep since the Nixon administration. "Miss Valois," I began, "I'm Archie Goodwin. I represent Nero Wolfe. We're investigating irregularities involving your shipments and your logistics coordinator, Thomas Negrelli." She didn't flinch. That was notable. "I assumed as much," she said, gesturing toward the window. "I suppose Anton sent you." Mr. DiCarlo was the initial point of contact, yes. She frowned faintly. "He would be." I cocked my head. "You don't sound thrilled." She leaned back. "Anton's intelligent, ambitious, charismatic, if you like that sort of thing. But he's not a strategist. He doesn't look ahead. He reacts." "And you do?" "I will try. Someone has been interfering with our shipments. Minor substitutions, route misalignments, and odd signatures on customs clearances. I noticed it 3 months ago. I flagged it. Anton said he'd handle it. And did he? Not enough. Or maybe too much." Her voice dropped. 2 weeks ago, I asked Thomas to quietly look through the last 6 manifests and cross-check them against our warehouse logs. I told no one else. I kept my voice level. Did he find anything? She looked at me, and for a second, the flint in her eyes softened. "I don't know. He asked for a meeting, then cancelled. He said he was working on something and needed time. See, was it like him to cancel?" "Number, not at all." I made a few notes. "Do the names Coyne or Datcher mean anything to you?" "Coyne is our warehouse director. Grady Datcher is one of our external auditors and handles compliance for international acquisitions." "Why?" "Just tracking the coffee beans." She didn't smile, which I appreciated. It meant she took things seriously. Back at the office, I gave Wolfe the rundown. He listened, nodded, and made one of his signature remarks that sounded like philosophy dressed as disdain. "Trust is a luxury most corporations purchase too cheaply." I didn't argue. By Friday morning, the brownstone started humming with visitors. First came Coin Marcus Coin, built like a freight crate with hair that looked like he combed it with a pencil sharpener. He arrived 10 minutes late, wore a jacket one size too small, and called Fritz boss at the door. Strike one. Inside, he fidgeted on the red chair like it might bite. Wolfe watched him the way a botanist studies fungus. You supervised the warehouse where the mislabeled shipments were routed. Yes, sir, he said, leaning forward, then immediately leaning back again. I run a tight crew. Nobody touches a crate without logging it. Yet someone did. Coin shrugged. Only 3 people have key access to the floor, me, Angela, and Miro. Angela's been on leave with a broken ankle. Miro's as green as guacamole. Then perhaps it was you. Coin flushed. Hey now, Wolfe raised a finger. Mr. Coin, if your role is legitimate, you have nothing to fear. If not, then your discomfort is appropriate. Coin didn't answer. He just muttered something about schedules and got out as soon as I opened the door. Next came Datcher. If Coin was cargo, Datcher was correspondence. Tall, lean, polished, and precise. His handshake was brief, and his questions were sharper than some of the knives I keep for field work. I've audited coffee routes for 15 years, he told Wolfe. This operation runs smoothly on paper, but something's been off. Clean ledgers can be a sign of messiness if you know what to look for. You believe someone's fabricating the data? Possibly. Or laundering it through smaller suppliers. I've seen it before. Shady exporters mix inventory from compromised farms with clean suppliers, then fudge the origin. And who benefits? Datcher narrowed his eyes. Whoever wants to build a shadow chain. Black market beans aren't just cheaper. They're untraceable, and if you're hiding something, that's priceless. When Datcher left, Wolfe finally leaned back, hands steepled. We now have 5 names, he said, each with a motive. Miss Valois seeks integrity. Mr. DiCarlo, influence. Mr. Negrelli, truth. Mr. Coin, control. And Mr. Datcher, he seeks precision. And the saboteur seeks concealment. That, Archie, is our lever. I nodded. The circle had formed, and somewhere within it, someone was grinding more than beans. They were grinding leverage into silence. If you've never tried tracking the coffee trade through New York, let me save you the trouble, don't. It's like trying to follow a goldfish through a sewer pipe. You get turned around, smell things you didn't expect, and eventually end up doubting your own sense of direction and judgment. But Wolfe had made it clear. The suspects were in place. The journal had stirred the pot. Now it was my turn to stick a spoon in and start tasting. I started with Marcus Coin. His warehouse sat out in Red Hook, tucked between a scaffolding yard and a graffiti-covered sheet metal shop that claimed, dubiously, to repair every machine but time. Coin wasn't there when I arrived. He was in the field according to a man named Miro, who looked like he could bench press a forklift but spoke like he was worried I might correct his grammar. I didn't press. Instead, I poked around. The floor itself was spotless. That caught my attention. In the warehouse world, cleanliness is a suggestion, not a standard. But this place was scrubbed to shine, with crates lined up like military parade rows and clipboards hanging from designated hooks like they were born there. Either someone was running a tight ship, or someone had something to hide and wanted to polish the silver before the guests arrived. I chatted with Miro while pretending to jot inventory counts. "Does Coin give you much direction?" I asked. Miro scratched his head. "He says to log everything, weight, time, who touches what. Says it's the only way to stay clean." I nodded. "Ever lose a crate?" "Once," he said. 2 months ago. Brazilian shipment, the label said Arabica, but the beans looked too dark and too oily. Coin said it was a misprint. "Did you believe him?" He hesitated. "I didn't have a choice," he said, then added quietly. "But I started bringing a camera to work. You know, just in case." Smart kid. From Red Hook, I made my way uptown to the Midtown office again, this time to pay a less official visit to Brenda Valois. I caught her just outside the building, coat over her arm, purse clutched like it was hiding more than just lipstick. "Miss Valois," I called, approaching with my best mix of charm and convenience. "Mind if I walk with you?" She gave me a look that could chip granite, but didn't say no. We walked east toward Park. It was just chilly enough to justify silence, which meant I had to warm things up quickly. "Miss Valois," I said, "Wolfe has a question he's too dignified to ask directly. Were you and DiCarlo ever involved professionally? I mean, anything off the books?" She blinked. "Once. That's all I got." "No," she said. "I don't like charisma. It's messy. Yet you vouched for Negrelli, trusted him. That's different. Tommy had restraint. He didn't perform. He observed. And observation makes people dangerous. It makes them inconvenient." I filed that away. We reached the corner, and she turned to go. Before she did, she handed me a folded slip of paper. "I found this in one of the old accounting folders after you left the other day," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be there." I waited until she was half a block away before unfolding it. It was a manifest, unremarkable except for one thing: it had been signed 3 times by someone named G. Datcher. Once as an inspector, once as a compliance officer, and once as a shipper. Now, I'm no cargo attorney, but even I know that's 3 hats too many. Either Datcher had a time machine, or someone was rubber stamping his name like it was a fire drill. Next stop, the man himself. I found Datcher later that afternoon on the mezzanine of a quiet café in the West Village, the kind of place where they serve espresso in ceramic cups that look like they've been judged by an art critic. I didn't make small talk. I just sat across from him and set the manifest on the table. "I'm flattered," he said coolly, "but I never sign anything 3 times unless I'm resigning." "So it's a forgery?" "Or a set-up," he said. "What does Wolfe think?" He's considering his options. "But I'm curious. Have you ever audited anything involving coin directly?" He sipped his drink thoughtfully. "Once? Last summer. A minor discrepancy in shipment dates." He blamed the port. I flagged it. Brenda handled the reprimand. "Did it stick?" "About as well as a rubber stamp." There it was again. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was dusk. Fritz had started dinner prep, and the smell of rosemary and pan-seared duck was enough to make me delay my report by 5 whole minutes. But Wolfe doesn't like leftovers in speech any more than he does on a plate, so I delivered the summary, clean and hot. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, fingers steepled. When I got to the manifest, he opened one eye and murmured, "Forgery implies falsehood, but triple certification implies orchestration." I didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said nothing for a full minute. Then he asked, "And DiCarlo?" "Busy man. Cancelled an appointment this afternoon. His secretary said he was out clarifying supplier contracts." "You want me to press?" Let him move. Rats leave trails. That night I typed up everything and made 3 neat piles. One for each suspect with fingerprints on the beanbags: Datcher, Coyne, and DiCarlo. Brenda's role, for now, was an open file. Lenora called just after 10. Her voice was tight. "Tommy's awake, not fully alert, but he said something strange." "What?" She hesitated. He said, "They used me as a funnel." Then he fell asleep again. I thanked her and hung up. Then I repeated the phrase out loud, just once. Wolfe, in the next room, responded through the walls. Indeed, it wasn't an answer. It was a milestone. Because when Wolfe starts agreeing with cryptic mutterings from half-conscious men, it means the case has officially entered what he calls its coagulation stage. And that's when things really start to stink. By Saturday morning, things had settled into that false calm Wolfe refers to as the deceptive interval. That's when people stop reacting and start scheming. And if Wolfe was right, and he usually wasn't, he wasn't watching a company anymore. We were watching a stage full of actors, each one waiting for the others to forget their lines. The coffee importers' cooperative had secrets. That much was clear, but what wasn't clear yet was how far those secrets extended, or who had the best reason to keep them buried. Wolfe, in true form, refused to leave the brownstone, but his instructions for me were precise and ever-expanding. My morning began with a visit to the cooperative's central document office, a quiet corner of the building few people bothered with unless they needed old contracts or shipping manifests, the kind of place that smelled like dust and silence. I had an appointment scheduled with a clerk named Rena. She was 22, wore tortoise-shell glasses that were too big for her face, and seemed suspicious that anyone outside accounting wanted to look at archived manifests. "Are you doing an audit?" she asked as she buzzed me in. "Something like that," I said. Rena led me to a back corner with a folding table and a stack of files already prepped. They were marked with the last 6-month shipment data sorted by date, origin, destination, and warehouse routing. Wolfe had given me a list of 3 shipment IDs to review and instructions to look for subtle consistencies amid documented chaos. That's Wolfe speak for patterns that only show up when you cross-reference enough minutiae to make your eyes water. I was 2 hours into my sifting when I noticed something strange. Each of the shipments in question, though originating from different suppliers and routed through different ports, had identical reference codes in the customs field. Not similar. Identical. A 9-digit identifier beginning with 447CN, followed by the same 5 trailing digits. That shouldn't happen. Customs numbers are unique to shipment, port, and manifest, unless someone was copying and pasting data, or worse, recycling paperwork. I photographed each page. Rena came by with coffee. I thanked her and resisted the urge to ask what brand it was. I already had enough irony to file for the week. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was mid-afternoon. Wolfe was in the plant room. Fritz was chopping herbs with the kind of precision that would make a surgeon jealous. I took the opportunity to head up to my room and transfer the photos to our internal server. I labeled everything, catalogued inconsistencies, and wrote a quick summary memo for Wolfe to grumble over later. It should have been routine, except something was off. My desk drawer, the top left one I keep locked out of habit, was open by a half-inch. That drawer holds the small things: pocket notebooks, backup flash drives, the emergency cash envelope Wolfe pretends not to know about. Nothing too dangerous, but nothing disposable either. I didn't panic. Wolfe says panic is for those who lack contingency. I checked everything. Nothing was missing. Nothing obvious anyway. But the notebook I'd used last week, an old leather-bound thing I only carry when a case gets messy, has been shifted. Slightly. I flipped through it. My shorthand notes on the initial interviews were still there. A few sketched diagrams. 2 pages had small smudges near the edge. Not mine. I went down to the office. Wolfe was back in his chair, arms folded, eyes half shut as if mid-nap, but I knew better. "Someone's been in my room," I said. He didn't open his eyes. "Explain." I gave him the rundown. "Drawer, notebook, fingerprints. You're certain?" "Yes. The smudges are too fresh, and I lock the drawer with a key I carry in my shoe. That's unsanitary. I'll alert the Department of Footwear." Meanwhile, someone was snooping, and they did it without leaving a door open or a window cracked. "Fritz says he hasn't seen anyone unfamiliar today." "Then it was someone familiar," Wolfe said. "Or someone skilled." He finally opened his eyes. "What was in the notebook?" "Initial summaries, notes on Datcher's timeline, Coin's shift logs. Nothing that would break the case wide open, but enough to accelerate concern," he said. "Or misdirect." Fritz entered, quietly. "Mr. Wolfe," he said. "Your phone call with Mr. Panzer." Wolfe waved him off. Later. Fritz lingered. He's already on the line. Wolfe sighed, then gestured. I picked up the phone and took it to the desk. Saul Panzer doesn't waste breath. He confirmed what Wolfe already suspected. I picked up a trail, Saul said. Someone's been calling the Port Authority under a fake name twice a week, always before a shipment reroute. The name they're using? Let me guess, I said. Thomas Negrelli. Bingo. Where's the number traced back to? Midtown. But it's scrambled. Proxy lines. Might be bouncing through a dozen relays. I thanked him and relayed the message to Wolfe. He nodded once. They're creating a ghost. I nodded back. To frame Negrelli, or shield the real voice. He steepled his fingers. That notebook of yours, he said, has now become a liability. So what do? We use it. That was classic Wolfe. Turn your vulnerability into bait. The plan was simple. We'd leave the notebook where it could be seen casually placed in the front room, near the reading table. Fritz would lock up the office and conservatory. We'd step out, briefly. Just long enough to let the fish nibble. And if someone came nibbling, we'd know who felt hungry enough to take the risk. At 6 o'clock, I made a show of forgetting the notebook on the reading table. I called out to Fritz that I was heading to 32nd for a quick bite, and he echoed it down the hall in that formal tone of his that makes everything sound like a royal departure. Wolfe stayed in the dining room, seated but within line of sight of the hallway mirror, angled just so as he liked it. At 6:23, someone crept through the front hallway. They moved quickly and confidently. They were wearing gloves. Professional. Precise. They scanned the room, located the notebook, and opened it. Wolfe rang the office bell once. I returned in less than a minute. But the intruder was gone. Not through the front. Not up the stairs. Just vanished. Like steam off a pot. Except for one thing. On the table next to the notebook, someone had left a coffee bean. Single origin. Dark roast. Oily. Too oily. Wolfe looked at it without touching it. A signature, he said. Coin? Possibly. But not certainly. Then what does it mean? It means, Wolfe said, we are now at war, and the enemy has declared it in our parlor. Sunday morning started like every other Sunday in the brownstone. Quiet, meticulous, and completely under Wolfe's control. Fritz was preparing eggs with chives and black truffle. The mail was stacked at a 90-degree angle on the sideboard, and the orchids in the plant rooms were being watered in accordance with a strict rotation that would make an army drill sergeant blink twice. But beneath all that civility, something had changed. Wolfe didn't comment on the weather. He didn't ask for the times. He simply sat in his chair with his fingers laced under his chin like a monk expecting fire from heaven. That's when I knew the intruder had done more than violate the sanctity of the brownstone. They'd stirred Wolfe's appetite for resolution. I had just finished updating the case board when the call came in. Saul Panzer on a secure line. Archie, he said. We've got movement. I didn't interrupt. Saul doesn't call unless it's worth the breath. This morning at 6:50, someone broke into the back office of Datcher and Knox Compliance on 48th Street. No cameras. Alarm system cut. What was taken? That's the thing. Nothing obvious. No files, no safes. Just a single item. Which was? A paperweight. I blinked. You woke me up on a Sunday to tell me someone stole an office decoration. It wasn't just any paperweight. It was a hollow, lead-lined cube. Datcher's secretary tells me he used it to store digital flash drives. Not labeled, just color-coded. How many? 6, usually. Only one was taken. That perked me up. Wolfe, hearing my tone shift, rose well metaphorically from his torpor. You think it's connected? I asked Saul. I don't think so, Wolfe thinks. I will report. I thanked him and hung up. Then I relayed the details to the boss. Wolfe closed his eyes and muttered, "The stolen data will correlate to the forged manifest." "How do you figure it out?" "Because the thief didn't take them all. They took the one most incriminating to them, and only them. It's an act of both precision and panic. That narrows our suspect list." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but not enough." He tapped the arm of his chair twice, a gesture I'd learned to translate as, "We are no longer waiting. We are pressing. Get Mr. Panzer on the line again, and then call Fred Durkin. Tell him to monitor Miss Valois for the next 48 hours. Discreetly. I raised a brow. Valois. She's the common thread in the timelines. She assigned Negrelli to the manifests. She reprimanded Coyne. She's the only one who directly interacts with both Datcher and DiCarlo on logistics. Too central to be a coincidence? Exactly. By noon, Fred was staked out in a borrowed sedan with a thermos of coffee and a newspaper folded around a scope lens. Saul was already combing through data from the Port Authority and running a sweep on warehouse badge access. I, meanwhile, took a walk. Not for exercise. Wolfe would faint at the idea. But sometimes you have to put your feet on the pavement to knock the rust off your thoughts. I walked past the cooperative's headquarters, then circled the block and stopped at a corner deli. A hot coffee and a sandwich gave me the illusion of civilian normalcy, but my mind was running full tilt. Why a forged manifest? Why tamper with beans that weren't even meant to ship internationally? Unless someone was using the coffee shipments as cover for something else. Something harder to trace. Smuggling, maybe. But smuggling what? Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had company. Lenora Negrelli was in the office, seated primly with a folder in her lap and tension in her eyes. She looked like a woman who'd memorized a speech and wasn't sure she'd get through it without breaking in the middle. "Miss Negrelli," I said, taking my chair. "You brought notes?" "Something better," she said, and handed Wolfe the folder. Inside were scanned documents. Shipping tags, dated over the last 3 months. Each one had been signed digitally, not in handwriting, but with encrypted QR authentication, the kind used for high-value commodities. "These weren't in the official cooperative files," she said. "I found them in Tommy's private cloud storage. He must have backed them up before." Her voice caught. Wolfe gave her a moment, then gestured for her to continue. "They match the shipments he mentioned in the journal, but here's the catch. The QR codes. I traced one. It's linked to a customs manifest for a Venezuelan medicinal cargo line, not coffee." That brought Wolfe's head up like a tortoise spotting rain. "Medicinal?" he asked. "Yes. Specifically, a plant extract called iboga root concentrate. Controlled export. It's regulated." I whistled. So someone's sneaking controlled medical products through coffee shipments. "It would explain the reroutes," Wolfe said, "and the need for falsified labels." "And the sabotage," I added. "If Tommy got too close, someone needed to make him look unstable, or disappear." Wolfe nodded. "Miss Negrelli, you have done well." She didn't smile. She just looked tired. "I want to know who used my brother, and why." "You shall," Wolfe said, then added softly, "provided they do not strike again." That evening, Fred called in with a development. Valois met with DiCarlo. A quiet place, bookstore cafe in Brooklyn Heights. She handed him a package. Not large. Could have been a tablet or a file folder. And then he left through the back. She stayed, took a call, and looked nervous. Then it disappeared. I looked at Wolfe. He didn't respond, just lifted the phone and dialed Saul. "Begin background on DiCarlo's finances," Wolfe said. "Look for recent accounts opened offshore. Cayman, Singapore, Dubai. Include shell firms. Also, confirm whether his divorce settlement included important concessions." He hung up. Then, for the first time in the case, Wolfe stood. Not far. Just long enough to pace 3 steps to the bookshelf and back. a rare event one that signaled a shift in the balance. "Archie," he said, "we are now in possession of motive, method, and fear, but we lack confession." I stood too. "So we stage the play?" He nodded. "Yes. Invite them. All of them. Tomorrow night, 8 sharp. In the office?" "Where else?" he said. "If someone's going to confess, let it be in the presence of orchids, logic, and justice." And that was Wolfe's way of saying the endgame had begun. Monday passed in a simmer. Not boiling. Wolfe doesn't do boiling. But if you've ever watched a master chef reduce a sauce, you understand the method. Low heat. It's been a long time. No distractions. Just ingredients condensed until only the essence remains. Wolfe spent the morning finalizing his position, his word, not mine. He didn't just plan confrontations. He staged them. With Wolfe, everything is theater. The chairs were rearranged. The lighting is adjusted by one shade. The decanter moved half an inch left on the credenza. The guest seating was aligned so that no one could see anyone else's expression without glancing toward Wolfe. "Perspective controls tension," he said. "Or confusion," I offered. But he ignored that. The invitations had already gone out, by courier. Each one was handwritten by me and delivered to the suspects with Wolfe's signature on thick cream cardstock that practically whispered, "Show up, or risk being left out of the alibi pool." All 5 were summoned: Brenda Valois, Anton DiCarlo, Grady Datcher, Marcus Coyne, and, at Wolfe's insistence, Lenora Negrelli. She protested initially, but Wolfe insisted on her presence. "She is both the sister of the wounded and the keeper of the journal," he said. "That makes her relevant, not optional." By 6:30 that evening, Fritz had prepared the office like it was hosting a diplomatic summit. The drinks were chilled, the air scrubbed of every kitchen smell, and the chairs placed with military symmetry. Wolfe remained in his office, motionless. He had eaten lightly, taken no phone calls, and listened to 3 Bach preludes without uttering a word. He was sharpening his mind, as only he could with silence. At precisely 7:54, the doorbell rang. The first to arrive was Datcher, punctual and polished as ever, with a briefcase he didn't open and a coat he refused to hand over. "Are you expecting snow?" I asked, hanging it anyway. "Number suspicion," he said. "It gets colder indoors than out sometimes." Next was Valois, then DiCarlo both, arriving within 3 minutes of each other, both offering firm, professional nods to me and glances to each other that couldn't decide between curiosity and hostility. Coyne lumbered in last, smelling faintly of cologne and confidence. He nodded at no one and immediately took the farthest chair. Lenora was already seated when they arrived. Wolfe insisted she arrive early. She sat near the orchids, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed straight ahead like a witness on the stand waiting for her cue. Wolfe entered at exactly 8:01. He took his seat with the kind of composure that lets everyone else know they're on trial, even if no one's been charged. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and flat as a lake before a storm, "you're not here as suspects. You are here as instruments." That got a few eyebrows raised. Coyne leaned back. Valois crossed her legs. DiCarlo shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks like he was preparing for an opening argument. "I have been asked to investigate the sabotage of coffee imports under the cooperative's management," Wolfe continued. "I accepted because my name was invoked in a note left beside a man presumed suicidal, Thomas Negrelli. That presumption was false. So is much else in this matter." He paused. Let the words simmer. DiCarlo opened his mouth to speak, but Wolfe lifted a hand, palm outward, without looking at him. "No interruptions. You will each have your say." Then he pointed gently at Datcher. "You, Mr. Datcher, are an auditor, a man trained to detect inconsistencies, and yet several forged shipping documents bear your signature. Explain." The Datcher didn't flinch. "I didn't sign them," Someone used my credentials. Digital fraud. I've submitted reports to that effect. Indeed, Wolfe said. But you didn't report it until after the stolen paperweight incident. Datcher's eyes narrowed. Because until then, I wasn't certain where the leak originated. You were guarding your reputation. I was guarding the truth, which I now believe lies elsewhere. Wolfe didn't press. He turned to Brenda Valois. You ordered Mr. Negrelli to investigate anomalies in the shipment logs. Then, 2 weeks later, you suspended access to several ports under the pretense of route optimization. Brenda kept her tone even. That's true. Because I suspected someone in the supply chain was diverting products, I needed to isolate the route. Why not inform the board? She glanced at DiCarlo. Because I didn't trust the board. DiCarlo smirked, but Wolfe silenced it with a glance. And you, Mr. DiCarlo, Wolfe said slowly, are the face of the cooperative. Yet your financial records show multiple holdings in offshore entities that share IP registration with small exporters in Venezuela and Colombia. That's circumstantial, DiCarlo said, not illegal. I invest in commodity chains. Everyone here knows that. Do you invest in Iboga route? Wolfe asked. Silence. I looked around the room. Valois blinked. Coyne glanced away. Datcher froze. DiCarlo exhaled. If I did, it would be within legal bounds. But you didn't declare the overlap to the cooperative, Wolfe said. You used the coffee shipments to mask the export of a regulated substance. That is not simply unethical. It is illegal. DiCarlo didn't speak. Wolfe looked at Coyne. And you? You signed off on receiving crates you never inspected. You reassigned Angela during a critical delivery window, and you authorized 3 reroutes through warehouses with no official logs. Coyne's jaw tightened. I was following orders. Whose? He didn't answer. Wolfe leaned forward. The conspiracy was a funnel. As Mr. Negrelli tried to tell his sister, the product moved through legitimate systems disguised as standard cargo. Each of you touched part of it, but only one of you initiated it. He paused, the room utterly still. It was you, Mr. DiCarlo. DiCarlo laughed, a dry, theatrical chuckle. Proof. You left it yourself. You used Mr. Negrelli's name to contact the port under false credentials. You left a coffee bean in this very house, and you received, from Miss Valois, a package containing the stolen flash drive. We have it now. Its files confirm everything. That landed like thunder. DiCarlo stood. This is absurd. No, Wolfe said calmly. It is closure. He turned to Lenora. Your brother's name will be cleared. The journal you found will go to the authorities. Mr. Panzer has already secured a sworn affidavit. And with that, Wolfe rose. The audience was dismissed, but the judgment remained. The office was still thick with the perfume of confrontation when the last guest left the brownstone. DiCarlo had walked out with the stiff neck of a man, trying not to crumble in front of witnesses. Valois followed quickly after, expression unreadable, arms crossed like a fortress around herself. Coyne left in a muttered haze, not angry so much as gutted. Datcher gave Wolfe a nod on his way out, half respect, half resignation. And Lenora, she stayed. She sat silent, her brother's journal still resting in her lap. The leather cover looked smaller now, less like evidence and more like a relic. She didn't speak until the front door clicked closed behind the last of them. Was it really all him? She asked. No, Wolfe said without hesitation. But it began with him, and it ended because of him. She turned the journal over in her hands. Tommy would have hated being used like that, and yet, Wolfe murmured, he left the trail that unraveled it. I leaned against the archway, arms crossed. Wolfe hadn't made a grand show of it in front of the group, he never does, but now, with the suspects gone, he allowed himself the rare indulgence of explanation, not for pride, for clarity. Archie, he said, You may begin the summary. I stepped forward and opened my notebook, flipping to the page I'd marked. Wolfe had already told me the entire sequence in private, but the way he preferred it, told clean, laid out like a formal dinner with each course in its proper place, was something to behold. So I gave it back to him. Start with the shipments, he said. The falsified manifests began 6 months ago, I read. All involved crates marked as specialty-grade coffee beans are expensive but common enough not to raise eyebrows. Within those shipments were hidden capsules of iboga root concentrate, routed through South American exporters that DiCarlo had financial interests in companies connected through offshore registrations. Wolfe interjected, his voice calm but absolute. DiCarlo saw a profitable opportunity. The iboga extract, while medically legal in some countries, is highly regulated. By channeling it through mislabeled shipments, he bypassed restrictions, multiplied his returns, and left almost no trace. But someone caught wind, I continued. Negrelli, assigned by Valois to discreetly audit inconsistencies. He was meticulous. He logged everything in a private journal, documenting names, dates, and shipping anomalies. Wolfe nodded, and then he disappeared. Not by force, I said, but by manipulation. DiCarlo needed to discredit him without drawing too much attention. So he staged a breakdown, drugged bourbon, and left a typed note beside the couch with vague allusions to Wolfe. That note was a diversion, a smoke signal to pique interest, not answer questions. He underestimated its effect, Wolfe said. It brought me into the affair. That was his first mistake. I turned the page. Then came the falsified digital trail of ghost calls placed to the Port Authority under Negrelli's name. DiCarlo was building a persona, one that could take the fall. If the smuggling was exposed, he'd blame it on a junior logistics handler gone rogue. Wolfe sniffed, cowardice in silk. Meanwhile, I continued. Valois remained suspicious but unaware of the full scope. She thought she was uncovering minor corruption. She assigned Coyne to help reroute inspections, believing he was just inefficient, not complicit. She shared the digital files she recovered with Datcher, who began building his own theory. And yet, Wolfe added, Datcher said nothing. Why? To protect himself, I said. He realized someone was forging his credentials. If the scheme were exposed, his name would be on every line. So he waited. I gathered data, but never acted. Until the paperweight, Wolfe said. That's right, I said. The only drive missing from Datcher's hidden cube was the one containing shipment trace logs that could verify the overlap between DiCarlo's private firms in the cooperative's routes. He had to recover it, Wolfe said, or destroy it. I turned the final page. When Lenora found the journal, it changed everything. It confirmed the funnel Negrelli had documented how each player unknowingly contributed to the scheme. Coyne waved shipments through. Valois unwittingly gave DiCarlo the space he needed. The Datcher did nothing, and DiCarlo coordinated the entire operation. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked at Lenora. Your brother was not a pawn. He was a keystone. Had he lived long enough to send that journal to the board, the house of cards would have collapsed sooner. Lenora's voice was quiet. He didn't deserve what they did to him. No, Wolfe said. He deserved recognition, and you will ensure he receives it. She nodded and stood, still holding the journal. Then, with the faintest trace of resolve returning to her posture, she said, I'll see to it. After she left, the brownstone exhaled. That's the only way to describe it. When you work for Wolfe long enough, you learn the house has moods, it breathes. And now it was quiet again, settled, like the air had been purged of something foul. I walked back into the office and found Wolfe already leaning into his chair, eyes closed again. That was a good show, I said. It was justice, he replied. For a man who sells orchids and hates movement, I added, you sure know how to orchestrate a takedown. He gave a small grunt. Phooey. Are you ever going to explain the coffee bean left on the table? It was theatre, he said. A symbol. An attempt to intimidate. Meant to say, I've been here. I can come again. But it was sloppy. Too deliberate. True saboteurs don't leave calling cards. So it was DiCarlo. Of course. Who else would leave evidence disguised as drama? I laughed. You realize that for a case involving shipping fraud, medical smuggling, and corporate deception, nobody even pulled a gun. He opened one eye. If they had, he said, you would have bungled it. Fortunately, intellect prevailed. That was Wolfe's idea of a compliment. I let it ride. Dinner that night was veal medallions with pearl onions and buttered leeks. Fritz had outdone himself, probably out of respect for Wolfe's performance or as a thank you for keeping bullets off the premises. I brought the wine, Wolfe approved the pairing, and we ate in silence. Then, somewhere between the last bite of sorbet and the first whiff of espresso, Wolfe set down his fork and said, "The world corrupts more with opportunity than intention. Mr. DiCarlo was not evil. He was efficient." "Efficiently crooked," I said. "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "And therefore, predictable." He stood, nodded once to Fritz, and disappeared into the plant rooms like a general returning to his map. I sat there a while, sipping my real coffee. I checked the bag myself, thinking about smuggled herbs and sabotaged lives, about what gets funneled through the cracks of legitimate work, and how a single journal, left behind by a man no one took seriously, had broken the whole thing open. And people say paper doesn't matter anymore. Tuesday evening, the air inside the brownstone was still, but it wasn't quiet. Not in the way Wolfe appreciates. Silence, to him, is the absence of external, uninvited, and unintelligent chatter. This silence had weight, the kind that settles into corners and under furniture like dust you can't reach with a broom. Something had shifted. The storm hadn't passed, it had simply retreated. Wolfe sat in his chair, the one that has absorbed more criminal confessions than most precinct rooms, and allowed the last fragments of conflict to settle. The house was closed to visitors. Fritz was permitted only to pass through with tea and minor announcements. The phone was off the hook, the doorbell disabled. Wolfe had declared it a night for intellectual digestion. Of course, digestion in this house rarely means peace, especially not when Saul Panzer and Fred Durkin both show up unannounced. That's not a coincidence. That's a signal. I met them in the vestibule. Fred looked like he'd come straight from the street, still wearing the same scuffed jacket and trailing the scent of deli pastrami and train platforms. Saul, on the other hand, wore the same calm that could pass for either satisfaction or exhaustion depending on the tilt of his head. "Evening, Archie," Saul said. "We've got one more puzzle piece." I opened the door wider and let them in. Wolfe didn't rise. He simply gestured. "What do you have?" Fred spoke first. We tracked the call logs. All of them, not just the ones to the Port Authority, but the ones routed through proxy lines out of Midtown. You were right. Someone was staging conversations to impersonate Negrelli. But what you didn't know was this. He handed Wolfe a sheet. "This one came after your confrontation." I leaned over Wolfe's shoulder. It was a transcript. Brief. A voicemail left on a line registered to a holding company in Curaçao. The voice was scrambled, but the language was crystal clear. "The drive is compromised. The shell firm must dissolve. Use the clean route. Eastern Port. Immediate." Saul took over. And guess who received a direct deposit from that same Curaçao shell company within 12 hours of that message? "Coin," I said. "Bingo." Wolfe grunted. "Not surprising. Agreement." "The wheel turns," he said. and those who push it from the shadows now step into the light. Fred nodded. We sent the financials to the cooperative's board. They're shaken. Legal proceedings are likely. Good, Wolfe said. But the legal process is rarely the moral one. Which brings us to what remains. He pointed at me. Archie, call them again. This time, no request. A summons. 1 hour from now, all of them. Here. I didn't need to ask who they meant. It was the same list, minus DiCarlo, who, at this moment, was probably deciding which of his cufflinks to wear to the arraignment. I made the calls. Coyne answered on the second ring, his voice brusque and tired. Datcher picked up from a cab and said nothing beyond understood. Valois hesitated but didn't argue. Lenora didn't ask why. She just said she'd be there. At 8 sharp, they were back in the office. Wolfe didn't wait for introductions. The setting was familiar, but the tone had shifted. This wasn't a reveal. This was a counting. I have not asked you here to shame or vindicate, Wolfe began. I have asked you here because justice, when pursued in courtrooms alone, is clumsy. What transpired within your cooperative was neither random nor accidental. It was orchestrated, but it could not have succeeded without each of you. He let that settle. Datcher adjusted his tie but said nothing. Coyne shifted in his seat. Valois looked down. You were manipulated, Wolfe continued, but only because you allowed yourselves to be. He turned first to Datcher. Your credentials were used to legitimize falsified documents. You discovered this, yet you acted slowly. Why? Datcher's jaw flexed. I needed time. No, Wolfe said. You needed distance. You feared guilt by proximity. That delay gave DiCarlo room to maneuver. Wolfe then turned to Coyne. You received funds this weekend. A final payment, I presume in exchange for silence or destruction of evidence. Why accept it? Coyne opened his mouth, then shut it. After a moment, he said, I thought it was just coffee. I didn't ask questions. That, Wolfe said, was your true failure. Complicity via convenience. He let the weight of that hang before shifting to Brenda Valois. You are perhaps the least culpable, but only because your suspicions were never paired with direct action. You trusted your instinct enough to assign Mr. Negrelli to investigate, but not enough to challenge DiCarlo when the anomalies grew. I couldn't prove it, she said quietly. No, Wolfe agreed, but you could have prepared. She looked away, ashamed, but not destroyed. Then Wolfe faced Lenora. Your brother was many things, dutiful, cautious, and thorough. But above all, he was brave. He catalogued what he could not say aloud. That act, which cost him his peace and nearly his life, is the fulcrum on which your cooperative now balances. She didn't reply. She just held the journal tighter. Wolfe leaned back. The authorities will handle DiCarlo. His empire of forged roots and shell companies is collapsing as we speak. Mr. Panzer has provided the digital trail. Mr. Durkin confirmed the financials. Mr. Goodwin. He glanced at me and confirmed the physical evidence. I gave a modest shrug, the kind that says, just doing my job and maybe saving your reputation in the process. Wolfe continued, but I must impress this upon you all. DiCarlo did not act in isolation. He simply found the holes in your system and used them. If your organization wishes to survive, you must close those holes, not with tighter locks, but with sharper eyes. There was silence again, heavier than before. Then Wolfe lifted his hand slightly, a dismissal without motion. You may go. And one by one they did. The Datcher left first, the briefcase still unopened. Coyne followed, more deflated than defiant. Valois lingered for a moment, offered Wolfe a quiet nod, then departed without another word. Only Lenora remained. You're not going to call the press? She asked. No, Wolfe said. The press will come when the subpoenas arrive, but the story they tell will not include the truth. That I leave to you. She smiled, the smallest curve of her lips, like a page turning. Then she left too. The door closed behind her, and just like that, the circle broke. The brownstone, as always, returns to itself. There are no sirens, no television trucks parked outside, and no dramatic curtain calls. That's not how Wolfe does endings. When justice lands in this house, it does so like a well-placed book on a polished shelf. Precise, silent, and final. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up to a perfectly folded copy of the Gazette on the dining room table. A small article halfway down the business page mentioned an internal audit underway at a prominent import cooperative. No names, no photos, just a whisper where a headline should have been. Fritz served breakfast with a faint smile. I asked him if he'd read the article. I do not require the paper to know when peace has returned, he said, setting down a plate of eggs so fluffy they probably required a passport. Mr. Wolfe is humming again. That was no metaphor. Wolfe was, in fact, humming. A low baritone thread of some obscure aria that hadn't seen the light of a New York stage in 50 years. He only hums when something's been settled deep down in the structure of the world, when things, as he sees them, have returned to their rightful order. When I entered the office, he didn't even glance up. He was reading. Something heavy and Latin. Fritz says you're humming, I offered. He turned a page. Fritz exaggerates. He also says your appetite's back. That, at least, is accurate. I took my usual seat and pulled out the final notes from the case. Well, the cooperative's board has moved fast. DeCarlo's been suspended, pending charges. Coyne's contract was terminated. Valois has taken leave to assist with restructuring, and Datcher's gone back to Europe. They've announced a third-party compliance team and a new audit procedure. Good, Wolfe said, not looking up. Measures taken too late are still preferable to none. Lenora called this morning, I added. Tommy's stable. They're moving him to a long-term recovery facility in the Hudson Valley. Quiet, scenic. She said, "Thank you." I do not require thanks. Still, she gave it. He made a sounder grunt with less irritation than usual, almost neutral. I stood and walked over to the bookshelves, pretending to straighten a few titles that hadn't moved in a decade. You know, I said, this one was different. In what regard? There was no corpse. There was nearly one. Still, nobody. No gun. No chase. You cracked it without ever leaving the chair. Phui, as though my chair limits me. I smiled. You think DeCarlo will get prison? Wolfe finally closed his book and looked at me. Perhaps. But the more likely outcome is financial ruin, professional disgrace, and a quiet retreat into a jurisdiction without extradition. That sounds like justice with a side of vacation. Justice is not punishment. It is a revelation. I gave that a second to breathe. Wolfe's reflections always come wrapped in quotations that sound like they were carved into marble sometime during the Enlightenment. So that's what this was about, I said, revealing who played the dirtiest with the cleanest beans in town. Precisely. I sat again, flipping my pen between my fingers. You know, I've always wondered something. Unsurprising. Why'd you really take the case? At the beginning, when DeCarlo first showed up with his polished smile and vague talk of tampered crates, you said it wasn't interesting. Then suddenly, you said yes. Wolfe leaned back, one eyebrow rising. Because someone invoked my name as a lure. Sure. But that's happened before. You don't always bite. He paused, then gestured toward the wall behind his desk. The one with the small framed quote, black ink on cream paper, simple as a whisper. Order is not merely preferable. It is necessary. When a man uses my name to conceal a lie, Wolfe said, he threatens not only reputation, but order. That, Archie, is intolerable. I gave a low whistle. So it wasn't about coffee at all. No, he said, but it could have been. The bean is merely the shell. The crime, as always, is within. There it was. A Wolfism, if ever I'd heard one. The rest of the day unfolded the way I liked it. No more calls from legal teams, no more drop-ins from nervous executives, and no more mystery men in tailored suits trying to finesse the truth out of the air. Just quiet. The kind that means a chapter's closed. I filed the case under coffee and added a double mark in the margin to note it involved both sabotage and smuggling. Wolfe keeps his own catalogue, naturally. Mine's less poetic but easier to update. At 4 o'clock, Fritz served a tray of open-faced roast beef sandwiches with horseradish creme. Wolfe consumed him with a deliberate pace, using only a linen napkin and the kind of self-satisfaction that makes you wonder if he's replaying the final confrontation in his head. I asked if he wanted brandy. He declined. At 5, the orchid room called him, the way a cathedral might call a priest. And I, left alone in the office, poured myself a small scotch and looked around at the silence. A journal had been the catalyst. A brother had nearly died. A man had leveraged the facade of a clean trade to move something that had no business traveling that route. And Wolfe, without leaving his square of carpet, had drawn a circle around the truth and closed it. I took one final note on the case file. Justice is quiet when done right. As I closed the folder and slid it into the drawer, the sun dropped behind the West Side buildings, casting a final beam of amber light across Wolfe's empty chair. Dinner would be served at 7, and tomorrow the orchids will bloom again.